Hi everybody, my name is Andy. I'm a member of Progressive Students of Milwaukee. Just a little bit briefly about our organization. We're a multi-issue student activist organization here at UWM. We just got formed around the middle of last spring, and we focus on, like I said, multiple different issues, but mostly we focus on education rights, anti-war, anti-racism, Palestine solidarity work, women's liberation, and so on. We meet every Wednesday at 5 p.m. If you're interested in getting involved. I'm going to talk today just very briefly about the history of the student movement in the United States, just to give a very, an extremely abridged version of that history. I'm going to be talking about three different organizations, the American Youth Congress, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Students for a Democratic Society. All right, first I'm going to talk about the American Youth Congress. The American Youth Congress was formed in 1935 to advocate for the rights of youth in the United States. On July 4th, 1936, the AYC issued the Declaration of the Rights of American Youth, which stated as follows: "We declare that our generation is rightfully entitled to a useful, creative, and happy life, the guarantees of which are full educational opportunities, steady employment at adequate wages, security in time of need, civil rights, religious freedom, and peace." And what I'd like to point out about this declaration is that it takes the kind of Bill of Rights that we have in this country and extends it much further, right? And it goes beyond the rights that we already have, and it advocates for more social rights, like the right to an education, the right to an adequate wage, to a living wage, the right to security and to peace, and so on. Rights that still to this day are not recognized in this country. By 1939, the AYC had nearly 5 million members in over 500 affiliated organizations on campuses across the United States. And what they were able to achieve is their activism led to the formation of the National Youth Administration, which was a government agency that was part of the New Deal. And the National Youth Administration provided employment, work-study opportunities, and job training opportunities for Americans between the age of 16 and 25, including young women, which was pretty radical at that time, which was, when before there was, a really vibrant feminist movement in the 60s and 70s. You can see here on the right, there's a poster for an NYA job program. All right, and I'm going to talk about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In 1960, dozens of independent student groups led protests throughout the South against Jim Crow segregation. These groups led sit-ins and occupations of white-owned businesses and public buildings. Later that year, all these different independent groups that were independently sitting in and occupying and fighting against segregation, they were all brought together at a student activist conference organized by Ella Baker at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. That's a picture of Ella Baker there on the left. This conference led to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. In 1961, SNCC played a major role in organizing the Freedom Riders, which were multiracial groups of activists who traveled throughout the South by bus in open defiance of local segregation laws. The Freedom Riders generated increased national opposition to segregation by bravely facing down brutal attacks by the Klan and other white supremacist mobs. Here on the right, you can see some Freedom Riders with some signs hanging out of the side of a bus. And here on the left, you can see some Freedom Riders sitting on the side of the road after their bus got firebombed by the Klan. So beginning in 1962, SNCC began to focus primarily on registering black voters in the South. Both SNCC activists and the voters they registered were routinely murdered for challenging the white power structure of the South at that time. SNCC was able to force the Kennedy administration to use the FBI to protect activists and protect black voters from mob violence. But the thing was, the local FBI agencies in the South were all filled with, Southern white FBI agents, And it turns out that they were more likely to participate in this mob violence than to offer protection from it. SNCC also helped organize the March on Washington in 1963, a very well-known protest. You can see a photo of it here on the right. So in short, students organized in SNCC played a central role in the civil rights movement in this country and in the victories that it was able to win. However, the student activists in SNCC were critical of the limitations of the civil rights movement, and in the late 60s, many began to advocate for national liberation and self-determination for African Americans in the United States. SNCC activists were among the founders of the Black Power movement. The phrase Black Power was first used by SNCC leader Stokely Carmichael in a speech in North Carolina in 1966. That's a picture of him on the left there. Carmichael joined the Black Panther Party the following year, and that's a picture of some Black Panthers there on the right. All right, and now lastly, I'd like to talk briefly about Students for a Democratic Society. SDS was founded in also 1960, like SNCC, at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Its founding manifesto, known as the Port Huron Statement, criticized the U.S. role in the Cold War, economic inequality, racial discrimination, and the sellout policies of mainstream labor unions and political parties. SDS grew rapidly after the beginning of the ground war in Vietnam in 1965. It became the leading organization in the anti-war movement, organizing a 25,000-person march against the war in Washington, D.C. Also in 1965, SDS activists organized teach-ins, much like this one, against the war on hundreds of campuses across the United States. SDS continued to organize against the war throughout the 1960s, and it played a pivotal role in building the New Left and in building the movement that would eventually end the war in Vietnam. All right, so what conclusions can we take from studying the history of these different organizations? Well, I think there are basically two conclusions. First, in the past, student activists have formed the most organized and the most radical group within larger social movements that embraced sectors of society that extended beyond college campuses. With SNCC in the civil rights movement, as well as with SDS in the anti-Vietnam War movement, we see that students were among the most dynamic, the most well-organized, and they played a crucial role in building these movements and in spreading them to the rest of society. And second, student activists, as the most radical and the most organized group within social movements, can win victories and can improve not only their own lives, but also the lives of other people throughout society, throughout the country and throughout the world. And what I want to stress today is that if we want to reverse the privatization and the corporatization of the American university system that Dan outlined in his presentation, we students, we must learn from the example of those who came before us. And I just want to close with some recommendations for further reading. These are a couple well-known books, one on SDS and one on SNCC, if anyone's interested in studying more the history of these organizations. So thanks for listening. If anyone has any questions.